Mortar, when my 17-year-old daughter was banned from my sister's wedding for being too young. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I just nodded and quietly planned something they'd never see coming. This isn't just a story about a wedding invitation. It's about what happens when you stop keeping the peace and start protecting what truly matters. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, keep listening. You'll understand why I chose silence and why that silence spoke louder than words. My 17-year-old daughter was banned from a wedding I didn't argue. I planned something else. When the wedding invitation arrived, I was standing at the kitchen counter, half distracted by a pot boiling over on the stove and the soft sound of Lena's pencil sketching at the dining table. It came in one of those heavy embossed envelopes with gold trim that practically screamed, "This is a big deal." I tore it open with the kind of curiosity that comes with habit, not expectation. And then I read the line that hollowed out my chest. "Adults only, 18 and over, strictly enforced, no exceptions." I read it once, then again. My fingers trembled slightly. The steam from the pot hissed behind me like an accusation. I felt Lena's eyes on me before I looked up. She sat frozen, pencil mid-air eyes locked on my face. "I'm not invited," she said quietly. "It says, it's an adults-only wedding." I kept my voice even neutral. My years as a nurse had taught me how to speak in tones that didn't betray the chaos inside. "Because I'm not 18, she said. I nodded. That was what the word said. But that's not what they meant. She stared at me a moment longer. "Is it because I'm adopted?" My breath caught. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the rising steam. She hadn't asked it with bitterness, not even sadness. Just this calm, quiet resignation, like it was a fact she had known all along and only now felt brave enough to say out loud. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. "Not." But I knew what she meant, and I knew she wasn't wrong. Lena came into my life when she was 3. Big eyes, quiet, wary of the world in a way no toddler should be. She didn't speak much that first month. Just watched, observed, judging if this home, if this woman could be safe. The first time she called me Mum, I was in the car after dropping her off at preschool. I pulled over and cried into the steering wheel. Not loud, just quietly, gratefully. That word, Mum, it wasn't a title, it was a promise. One I made to her and to myself: you will never feel unwanted again. I thought I was doing okay with that promise. I thought love, consistency, and presence could patch up every hole. I didn't realize how many cracks had formed until the invitation reminded me that some people never saw her the way I did. My sister Madeline had always been the center stage kind of person. Social, polished, Instagram perfect. When she got engaged, the announcement was practically a press release, a giant diamond-coordinated photo shoot, and hashtags that made me roll my eyes. Still, I congratulated her sincerely. Lena even handmade a wedding card. She spent hours on it. Paper bells glitter a calligraphy message she copied carefully from Pinterest. She showed it to me 3 times before sealing the envelope, nervous but proud. Madeline smiled when she received it, said it was sweet, tossed it into the backseat of her car. Weeks later, I found it half crushed under a bag of takeout. I didn't tell Lena. Lena, though, she stayed hopeful, kept looking up dresses online, asking me if she should wear her hair up or down, whether she might be asked to help decorate. She was trying, reaching, wanting to belong. I remember watching her one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on her bed sketchbook on her knees, drawing imaginary table settings for the reception. She asked, "Do you think they'll do fairy lights or candles?" I answered absently. "Probably both." And I remember thinking how magical she looked in that moment, completely absorbed, hopeful hers. And then the invitation came. The rule wasn't about alcohol. It wasn't about maturity. It was a line in the sand. She doesn't belong. Not here. Not with us. I didn't text Madeline, didn't call, didn't ask for an exception or explain my disappointment. I logged onto the RSVP site and selected not attending. No message, no note. Lena didn't ask me to do that. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just sat a little straighter that night at dinner. She ate her pasta quietly. She washed her plate without being asked. She was too practiced in disappointment to show it anymore. That night alone in my bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out the outfit I planned to wear to the wedding. I placed it back in its garment bag. Slowly. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to no one. You promised. Choose her. Every time. And that's what I did. I didn't attend the wedding. But I started truly showing up for my daughter. Looking back, the wedding invitation wasn't the first time Lena had been made to feel like a visitor in our family. It was simply the most blatant, the most polished. But the signs had been there all along, quiet and insidious, buried beneath polite smiles and passive shrugs. I had ignored them, thinking they were harmless, thinking love would be enough to drown them out. When Lena was 6, she drew a picture of our family. It was her, me and Eric standing outside a little house with a red door. She handed it to my mother with pride, the edges smudged with coloured pencils, a few misspelled words in the caption, our family. I remember how her face lit up when she placed it on my mother's lap. My mother smiled briefly and placed it on the kitchen table without comment. Later, when I asked why it wasn't on the fridge alongside her other grandchildren's artwork, she said, "Oh, I didn't realise it was for me." Didn't realise. As if Lena's small hands had drawn it for no one. As if it wasn't already obvious that she was craving a place on that wall. The next time we visited, Lena checked the fridge. Her drawing was gone. On Easter, Claire prepared personalised baskets for each grandchild names, written in looping script stuffed with candy and small toys. Lena's basket read, Happy Spring. Just that. No name, no flair. She smiled anyway, held it politely. When we got home, she placed the basket in her closet and never took it out again. Another time, we attended a family dinner. Lena walked into the kitchen and asked if she could help. No one answered. Not with a yes, not with a no. It was as if she hadn't spoken at all. She stood there for several minutes holding a tray of vegetables until Eric gently took it from her and guided her to sit down. That night, she didn't eat much. Just pushed the food around her plate. These weren't isolated moments. They were stitched in a larger pattern and each one tugged a little tighter. They taught her how to shrink, how to blend in, and how to smile in the face of being unseen. Sometimes Claire would introduce Lena as Rachel's girl. Never my granddaughter. And Madeline Welsh, she rarely referred to Lena by name at all, just called her your daughter in the same tone someone might say your dog or your car. Casual, detached. I kept hoping it was just an adjustment period, that maybe eventually they'd see what I saw, that Lena wasn't temporary, that she wasn't some noble gesture I'd made, that she was permanent, mine, ours. But part of me always knew better. Deep down, I feared they were waiting for the day I'd have a real child, one that carried my blood, not just my name. One night, when Lena was 8, she curled up beside me on the couch and said, Grandpa told me I should think of a more practical job than being an artist. I looked down at her. What did you say? She shrugged. I said, okay, but I think I want to do art anyway, even if it's not practical. I kissed the top of her head. Good. I didn't call my father, I didn't scold him, I didn't want to make waves, but now I wonder what if I had. What if I had drawn the line then, before Lena learned how to smile through exclusion? Before she learned that being accepted meant being invisible? Because that's what she did. She smiled. She stayed quiet. She tried not to make anyone uncomfortable, and I let her. Because I was still hoping they would change. still hoping they'd see her worth if we just stayed kind enough, quiet enough, grateful enough. The truth was, some of them never saw her as more than a chapter, a temporary child I was sheltering until my real one arrived. A charity, a phase. They never said it aloud. They didn't have to. But I saw it in every missed invitation, every lukewarm thank you, every photo that was cropped just so. I saw it in how they praised Madeline's children for their grades and their sports, and barely asked Lena how school was going. I saw it when Lena offered her artwork to my mother again, at age 12 this time, a watercolour of the lake we visited each summer, and my mother smiled and said, "How nice!" then tucked it into a drawer like a bill to be paid later. The wedding invitation didn't cause the fracture. It revealed it. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. That week, I walked into Lena's room while she was sketching. She was drawing a tree, bare leafless, its roots exposed, tangled. I asked, "What's that one about?" She looked up at me. "It's what family feels like." I swallowed the lump in my throat and sat beside her. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The drawing spoke for her. That was the night I promised myself something new. She will never again sit quietly while someone else decides her worth. Not if I can help it. The morning after I submitted my RSVP as not attending, my phone started buzzing. It began innocently enough a message from Madeline. "Hey, just saw your RSVP. Is everything okay?" Followed a few hours later by another. "If this is about the age rule, I hope you understand. We're being consistent. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. Those two words lodged somewhere behind my ribs like a splinter. Nothing personal, except it was. Lena wasn't some +1. She wasn't a colleague's toddler or a friend's teenage son tagging along. She was my daughter, Madeline's niece, a part of this family. Or at least she should have been. I didn't reply. What could I say that hadn't already been ignored 100 times in softer forms? By mid-morning, my sister Melissa chimed in. "Tessa said, you're not coming. What's going on?" Then my mum called. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time before answering. She never called unless something was wrong. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight with concern, "I heard you're not going to the wedding. Is this really about the age limit?" "Lena wasn't invited," I replied. "I'm not going without her." A long pause. Then, "It's not like she's a little kid. She's family." I waited for the next sentence, the apology, the understanding, the acknowledgement of Lena's feelings. But none came. Instead, my mother added, "Don't punish your sister over this. It's one night." I could feel my jaw tighten. "We're not going," I said simply. Then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. It never is when you choose silence over performance. The group chat, the one used for birthdays, holidays, and brunches, suddenly sprang to life. "Melissa, can't believe you're making such a big deal over one rule." "Madeline, this isn't about Lena. You're making it about her." My mother posted a long paragraph, the kind meant to sound wise and centering forgiveness, family unity, how hard it is to be caught in the middle. Words like healing and peace were thrown in, as if I were the one with the knife in my hand. Meanwhile, Lena deleted the photos of the dress she had chosen. Quietly, methodically, no tears, just gone. The Pinterest board of braided hairstyles, the screenshot of the shoes she had asked me about twice, the video of a makeup tutorial she'd watched 3 times before deciding it was too much. She erased all of it as though it never mattered. And maybe, to her, it never had, not really. Maybe she'd already expected it. Maybe she knew something I had refused to see, that she'd never been welcome to begin with, and that more than the wedding, more than the texts or the tension or the speeches about unity, is what broke my heart the most. Not the exclusion itself, but the fact that she wasn't surprised by it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the dining table long after Eric had gone to bed, staring at Lena's empty cup. I thought about the way she had said, "It's okay," when I told her we weren't going. Not as consolation, not as comfortable, just a flat truth, a statement of resignation. Eric came out sometime past midnight, rubbing his eyes, and asked gently, "Want me to say something to them?" I shook my head. It wouldn't change anything. He nodded, sat beside me in silence. Later, as we turned off the lights, I whispered into the dark, "I think I've spent my whole life trying to be the peacekeeper, the bridge, the one who holds it all together." Eric didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Maybe it's time someone held you together." His hand found mine beneath the covers, and I knew then that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I found Lena at the kitchen table with her sketchbook again. She was drawing a little girl standing alone in a field of people with no faces. I sat down across from her. "Looks heavy," I said. She shrugged. "It's just how it feels sometimes." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up a pencil and started shading the sky around her figure, dark grey clouds looming above. Lena looked up surprised. "You're drawing, I'm trying," I said, smiling. For the first time in days, she laughed. I asked her what she wanted to do that weekend. Anything I told her, anything but pretending. She thought about it for a while and said, "Can we go to the lake?" The lake was a couple of hours away, a place we usually saved for long weekends. But I said yes. And that Saturday, we packed sandwiches, sketch pads, and an old quilt, and drove. Just me, Eric, and Lena. We found a quiet patch near the shore. Lena sat in the sun and drew, while Eric skipped stones. I lay back and watched clouds shift in the sky like slow-moving truths. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop. At one point, Lena came over, handed me her sketchbook, and pointed to a drawing. It was a house, small, crooked, but filled with windows. And in the centre, a little figure holding a pencil. "I think this one's us," she said. I looked closer. There were no crowds, no faceless people, just 3 figures inside that house smiling. And for the first time, I realised maybe we didn't need to keep knocking on locked doors. Maybe we could just build our own home where no one needed to be asked twice to belong. December crept in with its usual glitter and noise, storefronts glowing, neighbours hanging lights, radio stations swapping out playlists for carols. But in our house, it was quiet. Not the warm, content kind of quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows clarity, the kind that settles after you stop pretending. Every year I hosted Christmas Eve. That had been the tradition. I would start planning weeks in advance who's bringing what, how many folding chairs to rent, when to pick up the ham, and which wine pairs best with turkey. I used to think that orchestrating this gathering made me an essential part of the family equation. That hosting meant I mattered. But this year, something in me had shifted. I didn't send out the usual group text. I didn't drag the extra table leaf up from the garage. I didn't make lists or light candles or even check the pantry for cloves. I didn't worry about the pine centerpiece, the name cards, or which cookies Lena should bake. We didn't go to the tree farm. We didn't pretend we were waiting for anyone. When Eric asked gently, should I go ahead and order the chairs, I just shook my head. No extra seats this year. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. And neither did Lena. They both understood. Because this year, I wasn't making room for anyone who had no space for my daughter in their hearts. Mid-December brought the first wave of confusion. Melissa texted, "Hey, are we still doing Christmas Eve dinner at your place? Let me know what I should bring." Then, Madeline naturally, "We'll be 5 again. Let me know if Lena wants anything special this year. If she's even going to be there this time." That last sentence, if she's even going to be there. As if Lena had chosen not to attend the wedding. As if her absence had been some kind of dramatic teenage rebellion rather than a calculated exclusion. I read it 3 times, then deleted it without replying. I didn't answer the texts, I didn't return the calls, I didn't perform the emotional labour of translating insults into good intentions. By the week before Christmas, the silence on my end had grown loud enough to echo. My mother called. I let it ring. Melissa called. Then Madeline. Then my father, who finally left a voicemail. Rachel, we just want to know what's going on. Your mother's upset. It's not too late to do the right thing. The right thing. That phrase hung in the air like a fog. As if the right thing were to open my doors, smile politely, and pretend that the fracture in our family wasn't deep and widening. As if playing hostess would somehow mend what had never been whole to begin with. Instead, we stayed home. Just the 3 of us. We made lasagna in pyjamas. Lena baked sugar cookies in strange shapes that barely held together. We watched movies. We opened presents early. No one walked on eggshells. No one had to translate passive-aggressive remarks. No one fell silent when Lena entered the room. It was quiet, peaceful, whole. And in that stillness, something inside me clicked into place. All those years I had mistaken tradition for love, obligation for connection. I thought hosting meant I belonged. That, being the one who held the logistics together, meant I was included. But that Christmas, without the pressure and the noise and the burden of pretending I saw the truth, peace isn't quiet because nothing's wrong. It's quiet because nothing is being ignored. A few days later, Lena and I were sitting in the living room. She was curled up under her favourite blanket, sketching in her notebook. I was folding laundry on the couch across from her. She paused, pencil midair, and without looking up asked, "If I wasn't adopted, do you think they'd like me more?" The words hit me like a falling tree, sudden, heavy, irreversible. I put down the laundry and moved to sit beside her. "Sweetheart," I said, choosing each word with care. "They might have pretended better, but the way they treat people who aren't like them, that was never about you." She looked at me then. Her eyes were serious, older than they should be, the same eyes that studied the world when she was 3 and unsure if it was safe. "I don't think I want them to like me anymore," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger, just clarity. A boundary was drawn in quiet ink. That night, I sat up in bed with a notebook and pen. I listed every holiday, every birthday, every school play where Lena had been made to feel like a guest. I wrote down the names of people who had smiled through her, but never at her. I saw the pattern laid out in black ink and grief. And in that moment, something in me let go. The years of explaining, of softening the blow, of staying small to keep the peace. I let them fall away, because if my daughter had the courage to say no more, then I would have the strength to hold that line for her. Eric found me there hours later, still writing. Making a list, he asked gently. "A boundary," I said, in ink. He sat beside me and kissed my temple. Then, "Let's never cross it again." The days after Christmas were thick with a strange kind of calm, the kind that feels earned, not gifted. Outside, the world buzzed with clearance sales and resolutions. Inside, we lived in the pause. Lena slept late. I cleaned slowly. Eric worked from home in silence. No one mentioned the absence of pine needles or relatives. No one asked about the wedding or the Christmas dinner that never was. We had made our choice, and the world didn't end. Then, on the 3rd day after Christmas, the silence broke not from us but from them. My phone buzzed with a voice message from Madeline. I hesitated before pressing play. Her voice, smooth and syrupy, filled the room like too much perfume. "I just think it's sad, Rachel. You always made such a big deal about how much you love Lena, but now it feels like you're using her as a shield. Like, anytime someone doesn't treat her like royalty, you cut them out. That's not healthy. That's not parenting. That's an obsession. Obsession. She said it was like a diagnosis, a flaw, a weakness. I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted the message and blocked her number without blinking. Because if loving Lena fiercely, wholly, without apology was called obsession, then yes, I was obsessed, and I would never be sorry for it. Later that evening, as we were washing dishes, Eric said quietly, "You okay?" I nodded. I think I've been waiting for that message, in some form, for years. He dried a plate and placed it in the cabinet. "You handled it." I didn't react, I corrected. I decided. And I had. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for their understanding. I wasn't hoping for their evolution. I was done explaining Lena's worth to people who should have seen it all along. The next day, my dad called. I didn't answer. He sent a message instead. "Your mother isn't sleeping. She feels like she's lost you. We know we messed up, but that doesn't justify shutting everyone out. That's not who you are. That's not who you are." I stared at those words for a long time, because for a while I believed that. I believed I was someone who made space, who forgave quickly, who kept the door open no matter how many times it was walked through with muddy shoes. But maybe that's who I was, not who I am. Now I am someone who knows that peace built on silence is not peace at all. That love, when asked to shrink, is not love. That a mother who chooses her child every single time is not obsessive, she's awake. That night, Lena and I went for a walk. The streets were still sprinkled with leftover lights and broken candy canes. She walked with her hands in her pockets, and I noticed how tall she'd gotten this year, how quiet she could be while still taking up space. "Did they say anything else?" she asked. "Your grandfather said your grandmother isn't sleeping, that they feel like they've lost me." Lena stopped and turned toward me. "Did they ever really have you?" The question was fair, piercing. I thought about all the years I had been trying to belong, all the times I had ignored my own instincts to preserve harmony. "No," I said. "I think they had a version of me, the version who made excuses for them." She nodded. We kept walking. A few blocks later, she said I used to think if I was really good, like really polite and helpful, they'd eventually warm up to me. My heart clenched. "That wasn't your job, sweetheart." "I know," she said. "Now I know." We walked in silence after that, passing by snow-dusted hedges and quiet porches. I thought about how many children carry that invisible labour, the job of earning love that should have been given freely. At home, Lena curled up on the couch with her sketch pad again. I peeked over her shoulder and saw a new drawing. It was of 3 figures holding umbrellas under a stormy sky. One umbrella covered all 3. "I like this one," I said. She smiled. "It's us." And it was. Imperfect, weathered, still standing. The next morning, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for ambiance, for ceremony, for marking something. Eric asked, "What's that for?" I smiled. "For the version of me that waited." That explained. That kept me hoping. I'm saying goodbye to her. He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. "She got us this far." She did, I agreed, but it's time for someone stronger to take it from here. And as the flame flickered, I whispered, "Thank you" to my old self for trying so hard, for lasting this long, for keeping the light on even when no one came. The new year didn't arrive with a bang. There were no clinking glasses, no roaring countdowns, no champagne-soaked toasts. Just the 3 of us curled up on the living room floor, playing a board game Lena had unwrapped a week earlier. It was the kind of game where no one knew the rules completely, but everyone laughed anyway. Eric kept losing on purpose. Lena made up point systems as we played, and I just watched them, letting the warmth of the moment fold over me. In that space, something inside me breathed for the first time in years. I wasn't planning how to balance the emotions of a dozen people. I wasn't smoothing over misunderstandings or decoding hidden slights. I wasn't wondering if someone had noticed Lena's absence or if anyone cared. I was just present with my family, my real family. The next morning, Lena stood at the kitchen window watching the snowfall. She held her mug with both hands like a ritual. I stood beside her and asked, "What are you thinking?" She took a slow sip. I'm not mad anymore. That surprised me. I looked at her sideways. "You're not..." She shook her head. "I think I'm just done, like fully done. There's a difference." That difference rang out loud in my heart. Done wasn't numbness. It wasn't detachment. It was liberation. "I'm proud of you," I said. "Not because you're over it, but because you chose yourself." She smiled. "I had a good teacher." Later that day, Eric suggested we go out to a new cafe that had opened downtown. It was nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. Lena brought her sketch pad. I bought a book. We didn't talk much, but it felt like communion. Just being together without any pressure to explain or perform. We came home to find an envelope slipped under our front door. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "We miss you and the door is always open." There was no mention of Lena, no apology, no real acknowledgement of what had happened, just a vague olive branch dangled like bait. I left the card on the kitchen counter. I didn't tear it up. I didn't respond. I simply let it sit there, let it mean what it meant. Or didn't. That weekend, Lena and I visited a local art exhibit. It was her idea. The gallery was small, tucked between a bookstore and a tea shop. She walked slowly through each piece, tilting her head, frowning, sometimes laughing. I watched her more than I watched the art. Near the back wall, she stopped in front of a canvas filled with intersecting lines and tiny bursts of colour. "This one reminds me of you," she said. "Me," she nodded. "It's quiet at first, but then you see how strong it is. Like, all the lines hold each other up." I didn't say anything. I just stood beside her until she was ready to move on. On our walk back to the car, she asked, "Do you ever miss them?" The question was so gentle it caught me off guard. "I miss the idea of them," I said slowly. "The version I thought they could be." Lena nodded. "Me too." At home, she curled up on the couch with her sketch pad again. I peeked over her shoulder and saw a new drawing taped to her mirror. It was a house again, like the one from before, but this time it had roots curling down into the earth. Deep, strong. There were 3 figures inside, and each held a light. I touched the edge of the paper and whispered, "Yes, this is us." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to explain my family to anyone. We weren't temporary. We weren't broken. We weren't missing anything. We were whole. The next morning, Eric found me in the kitchen staring at the card again. "Still thinking about it?" he asked. "Not really," I replied. "I think I'm just letting it go in stages." He nodded and poured coffee into my mug. "You know, I think you're stronger now than I've ever seen you." I smiled. It's funny. I don't feel strong. I feel clear. And that clarity, I realised, was what had been missing all those years. Clarity that I didn't owe anyone my silence, that I wasn't obligated to fix what I didn't break, that loving Lena fiercely and unapologetically didn't require anyone's permission. That evening, as the snow began to fall again, Lena stood by the window with her sketch pad. I joined her, and together we watched the world soften under white. She looked up at me and said, "I hope one day I can show someone how to love like you do." My throat tightened. "You already are." The days slid quietly into January. The tree lots were empty now, strings of bare bulbs left dangling above crusted snow. Most of the neighbourhood had taken down their lights, though a few stubborn wreaths clung to front doors as if resisting the calendar. Inside our home, something had settled. A new rhythm, not built on routine, but on understanding. We were no longer holding our breaths for messages, for invitations for validation that never came. One morning, Lena came down wearing a hoodie. She'd painted herself bright blues, streaks of yellow, and one line of text across the back that read, "This house is not missing anything." I stared at it, surprised. "You like it?" she asked. "I love it," I said. "It's perfect." She grinned. "It's the first thing I've made that's just for me. Not for school, not for gifts, just because I had something to say." And wasn't that what we were all trying to do, find the courage to say what we meant even if no one clapped, even if no one agreed? Later that week, Eric and I took Lena to a poetry night at the community centre. She'd found it online, and though none of us were regulars to events like that, we went. The room was filled with mismatched chairs, a dusty mic, and a stack of sugar cookies that had been slightly overbaked. We sat in the back, sipping cocoa from foam cups, while college students and retirees alike took turns sharing their words. One woman read a piece about her estranged sister. Her voice cracked midway and Lena reached for my hand. "You okay?" I whispered. She nodded. "It's just, I get it. The wanting to forgive and also not wanting to forget." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do either. Not until you're ready. Maybe not ever." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know what I'm really grateful for? What that you never tried to fix it. You just believed me." I felt my eyes sting. "That's the bare minimum, sweetheart." She shook her head. "Not everyone does that. You'd be surprised." I thought about all the times I had in fact tried to fix things, smoothed things, hidden cracks with seasonal garlands and casseroles. But maybe this version of me, this woman who listened more and justified less, was closer to the mother Lena had needed all along. The next day, we packed up some of the winter decorations. Lena insisted on keeping the string lights in her room. "They make the ceiling feel less lonely," she said. She was changing, growing, but not just in height or style, in resolve, in the way she carried herself, spoke up and took up space. In the past, she might have asked, "Do you think it's okay if I say no to them?" Now she said things like, "I've decided not to answer." There was power in that. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, flipping through an old family album. Photos of birthdays, reunions, Thanksgivings, and always Lena on the edge of the frame, smiling, polite, never quite centered. I closed the album. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply felt the weight of all the years we had spent trying to belong to something that never saw us fully. That weekend, I took the photo albums and reorganized them. I made a new one just for us. Not to erase the past, but to center the present. On the cover, I wrote "Chosen," daily. When I gave it to Lena, she flipped through slowly. Pictures from our small trips, her art shows, lazy Sundays, the lasagna in pajamas, the game night where no one won, Eric asleep on the couch with a book half open on his chest. She closed the book and smiled. "This feels more like history than anything else we ever documented." "Because it's real," I said. "Because no one's pretending." That night, she went to bed early. I lingered by her door, listening to the soft scratching of her pencil on sketch paper. Eric came beside me and whispered, "She's good. She's better than good," I said. "She's free." We stood in silence, the kind of silence that felt earned sacred. And I knew without ceremony that something in me had shifted permanently. I wasn't the family's peacekeeper. I wasn't the glue. I wasn't the hostess or the mediator or the one who made excuses for everyone else's bad behavior. I was Lena's mother, and that was enough. It was late January when we got the unexpected knock at the door. Not a loud, urgent pounding, just 3 soft taps like a question someone wasn't sure they wanted answered. I opened it to find Melissa standing there, gloved hands clutching a tin of cookies, and a nervous smile playing on her lips. "Hey," she said, "can I come in?" I hesitated, not because I was angry, but because for the first time in a long time, I realised I didn't owe an automatic yes. So I looked behind me. Lena sat at the kitchen table, sketchpad in hand. She saw who it was. Her expression didn't change. No fear, no excitement, just calm. I turned back to Melissa and said, "You can come in if this isn't about defending what happened." She nodded slowly. "It's not." So I let her in. She walked into the kitchen and offered the tin to Lena. "I remembered you liked these," she said, "the snickerdoodles with nutmeg." Lena accepted the tin but didn't say thank you. Not rudely, just honestly. "I came," Melissa said, sitting down across from us, "because I realised I never actually saw what you went through." Not really. I just kept thinking, it's not that bad, because it wasn't happening to me. I let her words hang there. And now I asked. Now I see it's not about what I thought was fair or not. It's about how invisible we made her feel, how we made you feel. Lena looked up. "Are you here to ask for forgiveness?" Melissa blinked. "I guess I am." Lena tilted her head. "I'm not sure I can do that yet. But I can tell you I'm not angry anymore. Just really tired." Melissa's face softened. "That's fair." After she left, Lena turned to me and said, "I didn't expect that." "Me neither." "Do you think it will change anything?" "I think it already has," I said. "Because you didn't bend to make her comfortable. You let her meet you where you are." That night we lit a candle again, not for grief this time, but for acknowledgement. Of growth, of effort, of boundaries honoured. A few days later, we created a new tradition, writing letters to our future selves. Not resolutions, just truths we didn't want to forget. Lena wrote hers in coloured pens. I saw the words, "Remember your own light," across the top. Mine began with, "You were always enough." We sealed them in envelopes and placed them in a drawer. A time capsule not of promises, but of power. On the first day of February, Eric surprised us with tickets to a cabin retreat up north. "Just a few days," he said. "Somewhere quiet. New snow, new view." We packed light books, Lena's art supplies, and warm clothes. The cabin was rustic, with no TV, spotty Wi-Fi, and a fireplace that took effort to light. But that was the point. We read books, made s'mores, talked late into the night. Lena shared a poem she'd written titled Inheritance, about what she hoped to carry forward and what she hoped to leave behind. It ended with, "I will not inherit silence." On our last night, I stood outside, alone, looking up at a sky clearer than any I'd seen in years. Stars spilled across the dark like confessions. And I thought of how far we had come, not in miles, but in understanding. I had spent so long trying to make a family out of people who didn't know how to love loudly, and maybe they never would. But I had also found a deeper, quieter truth, that family isn't defined by invitations or bloodlines or perfect holiday photos. It's defined by who shows up, who stays, who grows inside. Lena called for me. "Mum, come see what I drew," I smiled. That was the ending I didn't know I needed. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the clarity that comes from choosing your peace, choosing your child, choosing yourself. We returned home to an ordinary Monday. School, work, laundry. But something had shifted. We had seen what life could feel like without the weight of needing to prove we belonged. We had glimpsed the version of our lives where love wasn't negotiated, it was rooted. Lena came into my room that evening and handed me a folded note. "Just something I wanted you to have." Inside, in her careful print, it read, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I almost gave up on being seen." My throat tightened as I pulled her into a hug. You were never invisible to me. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. I know. That's why I'm okay now. And with that, we stepped into the rest of our lives, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with the full knowledge that what we had built together through silence and storm was more than enough.